Well, joining us this morning, I'm delighted to say, Lejla Softic, who is a public affairs analyst, and Charlie Downs, who is a political commentator. Very good morning to you.
Morning.
Are you well, both of you?
Yes. Brilliant.
Good.
Well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, that's excellent then. Right, let's start with this issue about drugs. I've spoken at length about what I think we need to do with drugs and drug policy in this country. This is really interesting. The Scottish Government has called for the decriminalisation of all drugs for personal use. Now, it wants the UK government to change the laws to allow people to be treated and supported rather than criminalised and excluded. However, it would still be an offence to have possession of drugs with the intention to supply. They want the introduction of supervised drug consumption facilities. Now, what is interesting about this, of course, in Scotland, they have the most terrible drug problems. Now, the issue, and I'll come on to why I think this is particularly interesting, but just in terms of the top line, Lejla, your thoughts?
I'm super in favour of this. I think controversially, so I think it's a brilliant policy. I think it actually doesn't go far enough. I'm very much on the train that...
Can you just grab the mic nearer to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it doesn't go far enough?
No, so I'm very much of the ilk that the government shouldn't be legislating what you can and cannot put in your body. And I think that drug legalisation is something that absolutely should happen in this country.
So that's interesting. They're saying decriminalise, you're saying legalise.
I absolutely think they should be legalised. I think they should be
legalised. All drugs?
Yeah, I think they should be legalised, and I think they should be heavily regulated and taxed by the government. And I think that then companies are liable to any kind of damages that people sustain whilst taking drugs. And I think that then people are able to receive higher quality drugs if they do want to take them.
So Charlie, you snorted at that point.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree more.
Well, Lejla's point is that if you decriminalise or legalise drugs, you then know you get safe supplies, so you know it's not cut with loads of other stuff. So at the moment kids are taking drugs, they have absolutely no idea what's in it. So for example, if you're taking cocaine, for example, it's often cut with amphetamine, for example.
Or ketamine.
Or ketamine. Yes, indeed.
Fentanyl.
Indeed, all of the above. Now, Scotland has a major problem with its drugs policy. It actually has seen year-on-year record numbers of fatal overdoses. It has the worst drug death rates in Europe, and of course, they're still sticking 250 million into addiction services. So you don't like this?
Not at all, no. I mean, I think we have to think about this civilizationally would be the way I'd put it, because I think we live in a sick society at the moment. In Britain, certainly, Scotland's no exception, and across the West, frankly, I think we are in sick and dying societies. And the last thing you do to, if you imagine our societies as a person, the last thing you do for a person is make one of the causes of their sickness more accessible, more available. The last thing you give a sick person is, like drugs that make you just escape reality.
But alcohol is a drug.
Yes, it is, but there's
it's the worst drug, actually. It's the one drug you wouldn't actually legalise if you looked at risk-benefit today, yeah.
Yes, but again, we're coming at this from a sort of utilitarian view, because there's actually a deep cultural and traditional background to alcohol.
Doesn't mean it's right.
There's actually a deep cultural and religious background to drugs as well, I have to say. It
spiritual.
It's incredible. It's
everywhere.
Gone back to civilizations. I mean, they find ancient sort of things in archaeological finds that have drug substances.
Yeah, hallucinogenics were really commonly used. But what I'm going to say is, does this story from Scotland, Charlie, not show that the war on drugs has failed?
Oh, the war on drugs has obviously failed.
If it's failed...
So you're now minister, OK? The war on drugs at last. Yeah. The war on drugs has failed. So what are you going to do? Continue with the same failed policies of having classification and locking people up and all the rest of it? Or will you do something different?
Well, I mean, enforcement has to be the kind of the foundation of any sort of trying to get rid a society of something. Obviously, you don't continue with policies that have failed, because, I mean, that's insanity. But again, the solution is not to throw your hands up and say, oh, OK, I guess we'll just make it legal, because that solves the problem, because
I would really push back on what you're saying, that the cause of problems are drugs. Drugs are not the cause. They are something that people take because they are in a distressful situation. If you really want to tackle the cause of the issue... Or for enjoyment. But I mean... the sort of side we're looking at now with this issue in Scotland with drug deaths, a lot of that is tied to
escapism,
poor mental health services that
and then poor quality drugs.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I don't remember who said this, but somebody said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's purpose, and that's a saying that I really like, because I think, I mean, you look at Scotland, and I'm no fan of Margaret Thatcher, frankly, and what was done to Scotland, what has been done to Scotland over the last, say, 50 years, it's no surprise that they have massive levels of drug use. But the solution to that is not to make them more accessible, it is to offer a greater purpose to people taking it.
I used to be exactly where you are, Charlie, and having raised a boy who's now 34 and I'm raising a girl of 4, we had that view in our house, and we tried really, really hard, and I promise you, my son tried really, really hard to push against it, and, tried cannabis, 12, really young, and I can tell you that cannabis is in the school playground, probably as young as 10.
You can smell it everywhere.
Right, so every one of our children is going to come up against the question of drugs. So I would much rather now, having gone through it once and now raising another one, if my little one goes to a festival, I would much prefer she can go to a tent where she gets her drugs tested, if that's what she chooses to do, and knows that she's not taking arsenic or rap.
And it's a really good point, because there are some nightclubs that are rolling out schemes like that to ensure that we don't have deaths. And so that's a really important point. I think your point about, they're often laced with ketamine is a really good one. I mean, I think what's interesting about this, Eleanor Whitman, who is Scotland's drugs policy minister, said the war on drugs has failed. It's a fact. I don't think we can dispute that. Our current drug law does not stop people using drugs. It does not stop people from experiencing the harm associated, and critically, it doesn't stop people dying. Absolutely. Criminalisation kills.
Absolutely, it does. I mean, drugs right now, the drug misuse, it costs the NHS £6.3 billion, and it costs the justice system £6.9 billion to enforce. That's a lot of money that could be directed somewhere else if this was all legalised.
But there's another point to this, isn't there? If you decriminalise, legalise, then obviously what you do overnight is remove the black market.
I'm not sure you do, and that's my issue.
Wouldn't you? What criminal gangs would disappear, county lines would disappear? Why wouldn't they?
Because let's give our kids proper cannabis, that's not laced and heavily laced with the bits that make them high, as it were, and THC, and all that will happen is they will then seek that out somewhere else. So the black market will still exist for drugs
to the same extent.
Not to the same extent.
So it would cut crime?
I think it would.
I think it would also really put a focus on the crime that's left over, because you have to remember that the gangs, they don't only engage in drugs. Drugs is like the least the lowest tier of what they engage in. They also do, arms dealing. They also, prostitution, people smuggling. Those are all things that you can then focus on if you have greater resources, because they're not being allocated to, chasing petty criminals who deal drugs on the street.
So can I just ask you another question? Because is this really what the SNP want, or is there a bigger political game going on? Because you see, drug policy is a reserved matter. It comes from the UK government. It doesn't come from the Scottish government. And the only way they could enact this is with a Section 30 order. So isn't this the gender reform? Isn't this Scotland?
Which they think they can't win. So.
Exactly. So isn't, with my Machiavellian mind, I think that this actually has nothing to do with actually about drugs. This is pushing the UK government. I mean,
whenever the SNP are in question, I think you have to wonder whether that is their true motivation. Because, they do love to, at every turn, sort of cause problems for the central government, and they clearly do want to. They'll use any issue to centralise more power to themselves. But I do just want to say on this drug issue, my fundamental feeling with it is that decriminalising drugs, in principle, creates a more permissive, more, dare I say, degenerate society, and that can only be a bad thing.
We have people every single day going to work who are using cocaine at work in the toilets. They've just found cocaine in the White House.
Yes. I wonder who that was.
I wonder. I don't think it could be any more
permissive.
Yeah. It's everywhere.
It's this argument that if it's more available, people will use it more.
Which in Portugal doesn't stack up, because they've done it and that didn't happen.
Exactly. It just means that people who use it are able to use it more safely and are therefore not as at danger of dying or falling horribly ill from all the different things it's laced with.
Prohibition never works.
I mean, it's really interesting. So many messages coming in on this. We should have done a whole thing on this. So many messages coming in. I believe you should legalise all drugs, says Simon. I'll go through some of the others. This one's Brian. Funny how everyone wants to protect the legal consumption of alcohol but wants to ban everything else. Alcohol is disgusting, life-changing and the most dangerous drug. The point that I try to make